Well, I'm gonna shut this down right now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Anime Club After Dark, the podcast that delves into all things anime, manga, and otaku culture related. My name is Alex, but you can call me Senpai. And join me tonight, I have our poser extraordinaire, Natai. Say hello, Natai.
Welcome to the Crycast, everyone.
Yes. Also, we've been drinking, so go easy on us. But yes, Natai, it may be a year late, but it won't be a dollar short. You and I are finally sitting down to do a spoiler cast of one of only two movies I've ever cried at while watching it in theaters. And that is Maquia, When the Promised Flower Blooms.
It's about time, yeah.
It's about Japanese title, Let's Decorate the Promised Flowers in the Morning of Farewells. That's such a silly title, but anyway, I'm kind of glad. I mean,
that's the usual. That's a usual for Mario Kada and a weird title, so whatever.
That is true. Yeah. So yeah, this is a movie by Mario Kada. Mario Kada, probably best known for Anohana. Yeah. I mean, she also wrote Keys Not Wrote. We don't talk about that. She also wrote the script for the Studio Dean version of Fate Stay Night, I believe.
Is that true?
I think she was a scriptwriter on that. Yes.
Let
me look that up real quick. Yeah, she was. She was indeed the scriptwriter for the Studio Dean Fate Stay Night, which somehow still has a 7.4 on Mal. I don't know how, but it does.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mario Kada's become known for really emotional storytelling.
And apparently CG dragons, if she's responsible for Fate Stay Night.
Yeah, and CG dragons. Let's again not talk about that. But in this case, she didn't just write. She was the director, scriptwriter, storyboard director, and I believe co-producer of Maquia.
Yeah,
she had many hats for this movie.
This is like her first directing job as well.
Yes, this was her directorial debut.
Yeah.
She's really known for her writing style more so than anything else. But yeah, this was her directorial debut, I have to say. What a fantastic directorial debut.
Yeah, this is like a big one, honestly.
Yeah. Wow.
Like, you'd think with your directorial debut, you'd go for something a bit, like, small scale, you know? Like, something intimate, like Anohana, for example, something along those lines. But, nah, she went for the big one.
Yeah, and for your directorial debut to be a feature is something else, too.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Obviously, PA Works, who were the studio behind this, had a lot of faith in not only the script that she was able to pen, but her abilities as an animator and director. And
right.
Thank goodness, because what we actually ended up getting was really good. And considering this is an anime original, that's even better in my mind.
Aren't most of her works, though, or like original? Correct me if I'm wrong.
A lot of the stuff that she's worked on, yes, obviously with the exception of Fate Stay Night.
Yeah, obviously.
But yeah, a lot of the stuff that she's worked on is original, or it's stuff that's loosely based on source material, but not like strictly source material based.
Right.
Yeah.
But by the way, if we weren't clear enough, we're going to spoil the entirety of the movie.
Yeah, well, it's a spoiler cast, so
yeah.
you kind of when you clicked on it, you knew what you were getting when it said spoiler cast there. So should we start with the technical stuff, or should we start with the story?
Yeah, sure. Let's start with technical aspects of the movie. All
right. First off, I want to say the soundtrack for this A+. I don't think there could have been, maybe if Hiroyuki Sawano had done the soundtrack, maybe it would have been better. But that's the only way I think it could have been better.
I don't think you can have a Sawano drop in this movie with a straight face on it. Like, let's be frank.
Maybe. Although I would not put it past Hiroyuki Sawano to come up with a really emotional soundtrack.
Sure. He's more than capable of making sweet tearjerkers. Trust me. Once we get to our Attack on Titan Spoilercast, you'll know. Anyway.
It's just anything that we talk about. Well, we back when we did our Promare Spoilercast, he did the music in that movie too, and it was amazing.
True. Anyway.
The music in this was done by Kenji Kawai, Not Kawai, Kawai. His name doesn't mean scary.
No, it's not.
I'm just kind of going through some of the stuff that he's done. He has done the music for both seasons of Mob Psycho 100.
Yeah. Phenomenal work there as well.
Did the music for Ranma 1/2, which had some really good music in it. Pretty like prolific when it comes to music.
Yeah.
I'm just looking through all of it now.
I mean, a lot of the staff on this movie are like pretty like, you know, big names in this industry, which is, I don't know if it's the same, because there is this one specific team that Mario Kada always brings for most of her projects, for Anohana and for the upcoming one she's working on, that I can't remember, for the life of me, I can't remember the name of that team, but she tends to like get around and like bring over a lot of super talented like artists to her like big projects, which is cool.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, just the music and the sound design in general, like there's a scene toward the end of the movie where there were the Mazarte, the main like civilization where this story takes place and is being invaded.
Right.
And there's like this battle going on, and the sound design in that particular sequence is really, really good.
Yeah, the sound design in general, like the opening scene with her, like, you know, getting the baby out of his dead mother's grasp, you know, that's...
God, and you hear the crackling of the bones. And it's
yeah,
like,
that's...
no.
It gets yeah.
It's to make it, you're cringing, but you're like, oh yes, that's really good.
Oh, we forgot to mention, like, right before we started recording, we both watched the movie together. It wasn't the first time for any of us.
Yes.
For me, it was second time. For you, it was
For
third.
me, it was the third because I'm a masochist.
Yeah. So, like, this is super fresh. But yeah, like, that part got, like, audible gasps and out of us. So, yeah, it did its job.
And just imagine seeing it in theaters and hearing that in surround sound. Boy, no. But yeah, there's so many great technical aspects of this. Another thing, you mentioned it while we were watching the movie together. The background art is just
it's
so
wonderful,
beautiful, and like we were really admiring the architecture of a lot of the buildings, and like especially like the main castle, fortress, whatever it is in the center of the city.
Yeah.
It's like, it's so well designed, and you said it looked like the Sydney Opera House.
Yeah, it really reminded me.
Which is not a bad comparison because it has a lot of sharp angles in it.
Also, like Maquia's like home country, like the whole architecture of where they make the hibio, the like cloth. That's also, there's something like super ethereal about the architecture of that place that looked like wonderful. And also,
there's a great contrast between, you see like this very worldly architecture in Mazarte, and then you see this like really fantastical, almost magical architecture of where Maquia and her people are from.
And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have like this industrial town where like they end up working, which also like contrasts very well with the ethereal sort of place that she came from.
Yeah,
so it's cool.
And the architecture itself, it lends itself to making the world seem very lived in, because some of the buildings or actually a great majority of the buildings look somewhat run down and lived in and used, and they don't look like they were built yesterday.
Yeah, you can see that especially in the farm where she grows up with Ariel. You see like just it feels authentic, right? And as you said, lived in.
Yeah. I think that's something that a lot of, I won't say a lot, but some anime tend to overlook when they're doing world building. Like, world building is part of, story writing, but it's also part of design.
Right.
Where if you don't have, unless it's a completely new place that you're going to, as in it was just built, it should look lived in. Everything shouldn't look brand new like it was built yesterday.
Like a lot of like beloved sci-fi movies and TV shows in the West as well sort of take that approach. Like, I mean, look at Star Wars. Everything is dirty,
Star Wars sort of,
and
Star Wars kind of pioneered that idea in Western science fiction movies. Prior to that, a lot of science fiction
was
really
flashy and clean and slick, right?
Yes. I mean, a great example of that would be Star Trek. Like, every single episode of Star Trek, the ship looks like it was built yesterday.
Yeah. It's a cool approach, and it makes your world feel lived in and just, it
makes it feel very much more alive.
Yeah.
And believable.
believe, and it feels like a world that existed prior to the story and after the story,
Yes,
right?
yes. It's really, I won't say frustrating because that's the wrong word. It's something that's so easily overlooked when you're doing like background art design that it's great when it's done and it's done really well, like it's done in Maquia. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah. And like the fact that we are talking about the background art of this movie just goes to show like it's so like for the most part it's all the entirety of the movie is so well executed in terms of the production itself, right?
Yeah,
Like we talk
I mean
about
that's
the
that's
we
what
talk
we're
about the
starting out with
color.
all the technical aspects of it.
Yeah, I mean we talked about also like the color choices for each character. We talk about like the, it just it except like personally I feel like it, not gonna lie, some of the CG isn't great, but aside from that, like it's so well put together and well thought out, like how
Yeah,
everything is designed.
I can forgive the few moments where it has some questionable CG. I will say something that they did really well with the CG is tracking shots. There's
Right,
three of
right.
them. There's three really great tracking shots in this movie that are done with CGI, and they're all three of them are done
Yeah,
really
like
really well.
the beginning with that like dragon thing that's like chasing Maquia in the tower, like it looks so good. That's such a good shot.
I'll be honest, it's set up and it looks like it could have been done in live action.
Yeah.
That's how well done it is. Because tracking shots in general are really difficult to do in animation, at least to make them look good. But in live action, they're typically done pretty well because it's a camera on a rig
Yeah.
that follows the characters around. Whereas in animation, you're having to constantly change the background and the position
And also you have
of
like
characters and the
and you
facial
have like a
expressions.
2D character that's like in a 3D space that also makes it you try and you don't want it to look jarring.
And I've seen tracking shots in anime just completely fuck up your believability of an entire scene just because they're so horrendously done. But the way the tracking shots in Maquia are done, it's so beautiful. It's almost like a masterclass in putting 2D characters in 3D space. Like more animators should watch this. Like this is how it should be done.
Another case of that, just by the way, because like you mentioned it, like Kizumonogatari is also like a fantastic film that does that. That it has 2D characters put in 3D environments. It's done so well.
Oh yeah, well Kizumonogatari, which is we should do a spoiler cast just for
We
Kizumonogatari
really should.
at some point. All three of those movies, but there's a like 15-minute long scene or so in the third Kizumonogatari movie, which is it's the fight between Koyomi and Kisha, where
Right.
that's almost all tracking shots. The entire scene from start to finish is almost entirely made up of tracking shots. And like,
Yeah.
bless Shaft for putting themselves through that, but we're not here to talk about Kizumonogatari. It is, but it is a good example of tracking shots done well.
But also like, what was it like? When like the cinematography as well in Maquia, like there's so many shots that they look so good. It's like I really like the shot composition. So again, like I keep saying, but it's so well put together and so thought out. It seems like there's
Yes.
a lot of time and consideration and was put in a lot of these scenes.
Well, you mentioned the cinematography. So one thing the movie has an ample amount is time skips due to the
Right.
nature of the story. It's something that we, especially John, has complained about anime kind of not doing very well. I mean, and fiction in general sometimes just fucks up time skips.
Yeah.
I know that in some stories, especially this one, they're 100% necessary because of the plot of this, what's being the story being told.
Yeah.
But it's so easy what's
Cinemat-
cinematogrammatically? I don't know.
Okay.
I don't even know if that's a word or not,
Keep
but I'm going
going.
to use it. It's so easy to mess it up that way, but it's not done that way in Maquia. So every time there's a time skip, it's almost like instantaneous,
Yeah.
and you have to rely on the way the characters look or the way the scene is composed or something else to give you that hint that time is skipped, because there's no like black screen with text that comes up. This is like 8 years later.
Yeah.
Like, no, you have to figure it out for yourself. It's also I give credit to Mario Okada on this. She thinks her audience is smart enough to figure that out on their own.
Yeah,
She's not
like,
pandering to the audience.
And they're utilizing the fact that it's a visual medium, right? And they're utilizing it for its full effect. There's a lot of scenes in this movie where it's pretty much show don't tell, which like personally, I really appreciated someone who loves cinema. Like, you can tell, you can infer a lot from like character acting and like just the editing in general. It just, it
Yeah.
feels so good.
But like just use cinematography to do your time skips.
Yeah.
It may be more difficult to set up, but it definitely when you execute it well, it's so good.
Both the cinematography and the character designs. I mean, I said it while we watched it, but my favorite part of the movie is when they are in the industrial city, right? Where Maquia is working in the bar and Ariel is like working in the mines or whatever. That whole section is, in my opinion, just perfect. It's really good, and I love how much you can infer from the first scene. You see Maquia running around this bar and, serving people, and she has this new design which looks fantastic. And then Ariel is walking inside and is not making eye contact with her, and that helps establish where that relationship between the two is at that moment. And also it has another one of my favorite shots in the movie where the soldiers are coming in, and then you have this like view from the top side of the bar, right? This balcony inside that they look down on the rest of the folks that are like drinking there. Like that whole scene itself is so well done, like in terms of like the production itself.
Yeah. And again, another aspect of cinematography is character design. And in that particular scene, that scene where Ariel's like a teenager, and they're in the industrial part of the city, and like you say, Maquia has the job at the bar and he goes off to the factory to work.
Right.
Throughout that entire sequence, throughout that entire point in Ariel's life, he and Maquia wear contrasting colors.
Yeah.
Whereas in no other part of the movie do they do that.
Mm-hmm. I didn't notice it till you pointed it out, which is cool because again, it reinforces like where the relationship is at that moment, which is cool.
I was saying Mario Kart, so many small details like this. That's why I love watching your stuff.
Yeah, I love it when because character clothing is again another tool to tell your story. For example, I've been rewatching some episodes of FMA, the original one actually, and there's a small little detail that I really like that in the first episode, like before, that happened. So Ed is wearing this like black shirt with a red sort of like tint to it, right? And then you skip forward like 10 years, and again he's with his red coat. And it's like. It's, kind of obvious, but it's a small detail to let your audience know, oh, it's the same character, because again, he's wearing the same color. Right? It's like, It's not mind-blowing, but it's like these small details that keep reinforcing whatever you're trying to convey to your audience, which make this medium so compelling, So it's great to see it, like, being performed in that way.
Well, it's like, you and I mentioned it when we did the JoJo's Part 5 reviews, toward the end of that. I was always questioning why David Production chose to go with the pink outfit instead of the traditional blue outfit that he actually wears in the manga. And then I realized at the end when he changes to a black shirt, it's such a better contrast from pink to black than from blue to black.
Yeah.
It's like these small details of cinematography, and it's like, yes, please.
By the way, JoJo Color Theory is a whole other can of worms, but that's for another day.
Yes, yeah. I wanted to point that out. It's a very similar thing to how Maquia and Ariel wear the contrasting colors only in that part of the movie. Mm-hmm. And it's the point of the movie in which they're having the most conflict between them.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
It's such a small detail, but so good.
What did you think of, like, so the time skips, in my opinion, also help the pace of the movie as well, like... Again, the movie is paced super well for the scope of it. But what did you think of like how quick the beginning of the movie turned from this is nice and pleasant to okay shit.
Yeah, it does. Like within 5 to 8 minutes, you go from like this really idyllic village where everyone seems really happy and they're doing their own little thing, and then all of a sudden it's like boom, everything comes in and everything is gone.
Yeah.
Everything is ripped from you. I personally loved it because while it is somewhat fast-paced, it sets the tone for what's to come.
Right.
Whereas, there's going to be times in the movie where things are going to be really happy and then stuff's going to happen and it's not going to be so great.
Yeah. Like the entire movie, like it managed to balances the peaceful and the super intense beats super well. Actually, again, now that I rewatched it, it doesn't feel too jarring when it goes from both sides of peaceful and intense and depressing.
Yeah, which is amazing because I think about having to explain this to like a producer or something on paper. That's got to be really hard. Like on paper, this doesn't seem like it would work, but in practice, it does.
Mm. So, I think we can go ahead and talk more about story details. What did you think of? Because I think there's one thing that holds this movie from being like a really like a masterpiece. I think it's a fantastic film, but I think there's something that's holding it back. And to me, it's sort of like it tries to juggle a lot of different themes, but it doesn't seem to connect all of them together as well as it wants to, right?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, what you're saying that it's throwing a lot at you at basically one time, and it's saying, "Here, you juggle these."
To some extent, like because so like to me, the film shines the most and is probably about like parenthood and the relationship between parents and those children, right? You can agree with me about that.
Oh yeah. The definite theme, I would say, if I were to boil the theme down of Maquia into a single sentence, it would be the question: what does it mean to be a good mother?
Right, but that's not all of it. It's also you have the movie is about that, but it's also about legends. It's also about like times changing. It's also about coming of age. It's also about industrializing versus to some extent nature, sort of. There's a lot of shit going on in it.
Do you bring this up, and it brings up something that I've thought about with this movie for a while now. Actually, ever since I watched it for the first time in theaters, and I wonder what would have happened had Mario Kata been allowed to expand the story into like a 12 or 13 episode series.
I don't feel like like sometimes I hear that about movies, and I feel like actually for this one, I don't think it would have served it right. I think it would have just got the story to be more stretched out, and it wouldn't have flown well as a series. I think as a movie, it flows really well from one scene to the next.
Maybe. I will say one thing I would have liked to have seen more of, and this has to do a little bit with world building, is one of the things that, and you kind of mentioned it, one of the things that you see throughout the course of the movie is this this society that they end up living in, Ariel and Maquia Mezarte. When you're first introduced to it, it's a society that's in the process of expanding, and over the course of the story, you're watching it slowly collapse in on itself because it's become very arrogant and it's sort of refusing to change with the times. And I think again, that particular element of it would have been really cool to see fleshed out a little longer.
Yeah, and again, that's another there's also like this thing with cycles in this movie, because again, you get to this like civilization, and then by the end of the movie, it's now crumbling because it's invaded by a different nation, which is not so different from where this city was back when the movie started. So it's like, and I just. The cyclical nature of like there's so many things in this movie that are around cycles, because again the movie begins with Maquia saving this child, and that's with Maquia helping this woman like give birth to a child, and like in that specific case that's like an emotional payoff that really works. But in terms of like the different nations, it's like a movie like, oh, that's cool, but it doesn't feel like it's saying anything. And maybe it's not trying to say anything. Maybe I'm just like thinking about it too hard. But it's like, I don't know. It feels like the movie has a lot of things it's trying to like throw at you, but they're not really some of them do, but not all of them connect that well together. That's what I feel like,
Yeah, I definitely understand where you're coming from. And I think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. It does try to, the movie itself does try to balance as much of those themes as it can at one time, and there are times where it's like, okay, this is great, but Does this really? Are you really trying to say anything with this, or is this just fluff for the background?
And again, not to discredit the movie because what it does fantastically. Again, like the heart of the movie is Maquia and Ariel's relationship, and that is like done phenomenally. Like the writing, the acting, everything about it, that's perfect.
But I don't think the story would have been, or the movie itself would have been received as well, or even been as well done, had it not had that other stuff around it.
Maybe that like the everything else adds a lot more weight and to some extent melodrama. Again, it's Mario Kart, for better or for worse, and I don't want the movie without all of that. I would never want the movie any different in terms of like discarding those elements. I just feel like maybe I'm missing something. I just feel like some of these elements just don't quite come together as well as I would have hoped for.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I don't know. And you mentioned like maybe it's not trying to say anything. Some of these things, especially like this societal collapse, may not actually be trying to say anything in
maybe it's
in
just
reference to the main story, but they do kind of unintentionally tie into things that are very believable.
Yeah, sure.
For example, like the society that they live in, Mazarte, kind of collapsing in on itself after going through an industrial revolution is very analogous to what happened to the Holy Roman Empire after the first industrial revolution in Europe.
Yeah, that's right.
Because a lot of the nations around it started to gang up on it, and it's like, yo, you're not keeping up with the times. We're coming in to take this over from you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I
so
don't know.
maybe it serves to just make
it's
the
like showing how
world
like
itself
they
more
come up
believable.
and like or they had it coming all along or whatever along those lines maybe. What did you think of like the characters themselves? Like we can go from let's talk about Maquia and Ariel first because again they're like the most important characters in the movie.
Well, you and I mentioned this. I want to talk about the names for a second.
Sure.
There's a lot of names in this movie that end with L, and a lot of real-world names that end with L come from Hebrew.
Yeah, so like El in Hebrew means God, right? So you have the name Ariel and you have the name Daniel, but we need to like make a quick distinction because there's a lot of names in the movie that also like Hazel, but that doesn't necessarily mean Hazel, right? We need to make a quick distinction. But yeah, like
Ariel is a Hebrew name, isn't it?
Yeah, Ariel is a Hebrew name. It's which
what does it actually mean in Hebrew?
I think like let me fact check that real quick.
Language lessons with Natai.
I'll fact check that real quick. As far as I can remember, it is like named after like an angel, but I might be wrong. Might be wrong.
All I know is it's the name of a mermaid.
So yeah, god damn it. Ariel is a different name for Jerusalem and the Holy Temple, and it's taken from the Bible. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what it
Interesting.
means. Yeah. Anyway, that's that. I don't think it does anything like in the movie that sort of works for that. Let me think.
Kind of.
I don't know, but it is like an interesting like anecdote because I can't for the life of me I can't remember which one, but there was another character named like that. Maybe I'm wrong, but whatever.
I don't know. I just thought that the naming of a lot of these characters is very interesting. Like Maquia, technically comes from Spanish.
What does it mean? Do you know?
It's more of a South American word than anything else, and it means like reach, as in like not the verb reach, but
like
being able to project yourself.
Oh, okay.
That kind of reach.
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting.
I don't know if that's intentional on Mario Kata's part, but I think it may be just a foreign-sounding word that's easy to pronounce in Japanese.
Also, Ariel is like sort of a combination of the words lion and god, so that's also kind of works. Now that I think about it. Yeah, that works. Don't know why I didn't think about it.
But in terms of actual design, I love a lot of the characters' design. I also love the fact that since this story takes place over many years, the actual design of the characters changes to reflect that. Especially with Maquia, who starts out as this really like it may not be, but I'm gonna say bleached blonde, very brightly blonde colored hair.
Yeah, then she dyes her hair because, she's trying to hide her identity and all that good stuff.
Well, and also she dyes her hair to be a very similar color to Ariel's.
Yeah, I mean, makes sense.
Yeah. It's like, I may not be your mother, but I'm going to sure try and look like it.
Which is also a funny note, because then when you get to that part where they're in the industrial city, one of the characters asks Ariel, say, is she like your sister or anything? Because at that point he's like grown up and she still remains in her like child sort of form, look, whatever, which is interesting.
It's also worth mentioning that, and you asked this because you didn't remember when we first started watching the movie together, about how this story is about motherhood, and you never actually see Maquia have a mom. And it's mentioned later on that she doesn't remember ever having parents at all. And in the very beginning of the story, she's seen living with the village elder.
Yeah.
So I guess you can assume from that she is an orphan.
Yeah, that's something strange as well. That it's like not really developed much, that whole aspect that she doesn't have. I don't know. I mean, it makes sense because then she doesn't know how she's supposed to act as a mother to Ariel, but it's like, I don't know.
I think it's now. I have nothing to go on with this, but I think this is this may be Mario Kata actually saying that you don't actually like motherhood is something that's ingrained in women. Like you don't necessarily have to see it done to be a good parent or be a good mother. Like you can instinctively know how to be a good mother or a good parent.
Not that I would know as a male, but whatever.
Well, that's why I said
I'm
parents,
kidding.
Because you could be a father.
I'm kidding. Sure, that makes some sense. Yeah, to some extent. I guess I can get behind that.
Yeah. I mean, just because obviously it's the ideal thing to be raised by your parents, but if you're not, it doesn't mean that you yourself will go on to necessarily be a bad parent.
So lately, well, I mentioned it before, but I did finish Clannad, and that show also like talks about parenting and parenthood and the relationship between parents and children, whatnot, and family. What do you feel about that, about shows that are like centered around that type of story? Because I'm having a hard time remembering more aside from Maquia and Clannad, but
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I personally I love it. As someone myself who really wants to be a parent someday, I love watching stuff like this, and I think that there should be more I'm not saying that there should be a lot of stuff, but there should definitely be more stuff out there geared at these questions for people who are thinking about becoming parents one day, because it's a great question, because there's no definitive guide out there for. I mean, there are parenting books out there, sure, but there's no definitive guide out there for how to raise a good child. Yeah. So it's great fodder for stories like this that ask this kind of question. And I think these are two great examples. Maquia and Clannad are great examples of stories that ask this question, and you get two really great two really great answers to that question. And in the case of Clannad, you actually get examples of how to be a good parent and a bad parent.
Yeah, for sure.
Whereas in Maquia, you're just seeing how to be a good parent.
Yeah. That whole, like, I keep coming back to that part of the movie because, again, it's just my favorite. That whole part of, like, her conflict with Ariel is just it's so fascinating because it feels real, Like, a lot of us probably have been there in that type of, like, situation with a parent, and, like, we get into these types of fights. It's great.
Where, like, you're not mature enough to realize why your parents will tell you no, you can't do something, so you just get all huffy and puffy and it's like, I don't like you anymore, I hate you. that scene where Maquia and Ariel are in their, like, room in the inn, and he comes home drunk.
Yeah, that one's great.
His friends get him drunk, and then they get into that argument, and he's like, he steps on the Hebiol, and he's like, no. And he's like, I hate that thing. Why do you keep it around? I want you to throw it away. And then she just slaps the shit out of him.
A well-deserved slap.
As someone who's been slapped pretty hard by my mother in the past, I can really relate to that. But yeah, I mean, it's not my finest moment in my life, and I don't like to revisit it very often. But yeah, I mean, I've had those moments with my parents. It's like you're so immature, and you don't realize how, I hate using this term, but how the world works. And your parents just have that experience that you don't, and they have to kind of shake the sense into you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Also,
it does cause a lot of conflict between parents and children in real life, and it's great to see it reflected this way. Again, it's another one of the things about the story that makes this so believable.
Yeah, that's very true. Also, it like goes back to like the previous sort of fight that they had when Ariel was younger, and like Maquia can't find work, which means she can't find food for both of them, and then she comes home and he's like playing with the the
loom.
Yeah, that one. And like she gets super upset and she sort of breaks down, but then she realizes like, nah, this isn't right, you know, like I'm here for both of us.
This isn't worth yelling at him over.
Yeah, and it's like both of them sort of learn from each other, which is again, that's like the best type of relationships, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I've been told by so many people, especially people my age that have now gone on to have children of their own, that they say that it grounds them, like having a child grounds them more so than anything else in their life. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, even though I myself have no experience with it. Just because I've seen it happen so many times with people that I know and people that I'm friends with. And again, you see, it's another thing that you see that makes Maquia so believable is you actually see her get grounded into reality by her relationship with Ariel, as raising her as her son, raising him as her son.
And then the movie also shows you what type of like how you can like become less of a person if you're sort of like not in a good relationship with your like child. If you even have one. Like, for example, I keep forgetting her name.
Lelia?
Yeah, she. So, like, for the entirety of the movie, she's separated from her daughter. And she's, like, angry.
She's going slowly insane.
Yeah. And it's, like, it's awful.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
With Lelia, I am glad you brought that up. With Lelia, you actually see two different types of insanity going on. She gets basically forced away from her homeland and is forced into a relationship with this prince who's trying to bring in new blood into their like royal bloodline because they realize that the hold they have over the nations around them is fading away because they have these little flying dragon things that are dying off. And so they're like, well, we have another ace up our sleeve. We'll just bring in new bloodlines and we'll be our princes and our kings from now on will be immortal. And so she's forcibly ripped away from her homeland to go basically be a consort for a prince. And then when she actually has the child is ripped away from her. She's not allowed to see her. And then you also have the character of Krim, who in the beginning is in love with Lelia.
Right.
And again, as Lelia is forced away, to go be this prince's consort, you see him over time kind of go slowly mad with being separated from her.
Yeah.
And he but I love how he's portrayed because in the very beginning you're like, oh, he's a sweet love struck child almost.
But by the end he's like super pathetic.
But at the end he's like he's like pathetic and he's just become so enraged and like tied up in his own quest for revenge and to get Lelia back that he can't see anything else going on around him. It's the only thing that he can see is getting Lelia back.
And when when he reaches that goal and she's like not she's not going with him, he's like fuck it, I'm gonna burn everything.
I like how he approaches that. Like you can tell that he's actually seen this outcome in his mind because he comes with like the torch that's like lit and on fire and shit, and he's like, all right, come back with me, and he rejects her. He's like, oh, well, I'm gonna shut this down right now. I'm killing both of us.
Yeah.
Which is, if you think about it, that's very Romeo and Juliet-esque.
Yeah, to some extent.
Yeah. there's quite a few allusions to Shakespeare in this. I mean, the fact that the Hebial is basically a tapestry that is like analogous to one's life and the passage of time is a theme that you see in a couple of different Shakespeare plays, most notably The Tempest and The Merchant of Venice. You see like the idea of a tapestry being used as an analog for the passage of time or someone's life. So that was really cool to see in that too.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Also,
I love the fact that you see, going back to my original point, I love the fact that with Lelia and Grimm, you see two different types of insanity. One from someone being ripped away from their homeland and their lover, and one from someone being ripped away from their own child.
Yeah. Also, it's like just a small note about the Hebio. It's like cool that they sort of have their own language that they write into the cloth itself, which is like just a neat detail, I guess.
I almost wonder if that's also supposed to be an analog to something that happened during World War II.
Okay.
Because there were a lot of secret messages were implanted in tapestry designs, like for blankets and for sheets and bedding that were given out. So it was a way for the Allies to secretly send messages.
Could be. I don't know.
They hid Morse code in the designs.
Do you want to talk about the ending or not yet? Because the ending
we can say the ending for the end, but there are a couple of things I want to talk about.
Sure.
So story wise, one thing I did want to talk about. So, do you think it's the scene with the dog? I want to talk about the scene with the dog.
Oh, I fucking hate that scene.
You hate that scene because you think it was written by you think it was written by Araki because a dog died.
Well, when I first watched the movie like a while ago, that was the only scene that really got me because it was like, I don't like it.
But again, yeah. Speaking of analogies, there's so many analogies to that scene. So in the real world, humans and dogs are a lot like Maquia and everyone else. Hopefully, human beings outlive dogs by a pretty wide margin. I mean, you're kind of lucky if a dog lives to be 20 years old.
Yeah.
Whereas most humans have, well, at least humans in the West, have a life expectancy anywhere between 75 and 80 years.
Yeah.
The same thing can be said for Maquia and everyone else around her. I mean, they never give like an actual timeline. It's sort of implied that they're not necessarily immortal, but that her race lives an inordinately long time.
Yeah.
Like maybe 1,000 years. Whereas the human beings have the average, 50 to 75 year life.
You mean that whole like sort of idea of like, to some extent, parents burying their own children?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is kind of what happens at the end of the story, but we'll save that.
So, yeah.
But yeah, that scene so brilliantly echoes what you actually do see at the end.
That's true, actually.
The movie.
Yeah.
And it's great foreshadowing that you don't really think about the first time that you see it. I only realized it the second time that I saw it, how great foreshadowing that was. And even Maquia herself, she has to kind of steel herself away from this and kind of run away from it because she has that realization when I think it's Ariel that actually asked the question. Does everyone die? And she has to run away because she starts crying. She's like, that's eventually going to happen to Ariel. I'm going to have to bury him too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great foreshadowing scene, and it's so analogous to what Maquia goes through with everyone else around her.
Yeah, that's very true.
It isn't one of her own people.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it is kind of also analogous to parents having to bury their own children, which is something
a thing that happens.
Have to do.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's something that happens.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
but it isn't. I have enormous amounts of sympathy, probably more so for anyone else than parents that have to bury their own children, because I can't imagine what that's like. It should always be the other way around.
Yeah. I'll tell you a story maybe after the recording that sort of relates to it because it's kind of awful. But yeah, it's the worst thing ever, really.
Wow, I'm looking forward to you telling me an awful story.
You shouldn't.
Yeah, anyway. I think that definitely leads us into the ending, though, if we want to talk about that now, because we've been talking for about 50 minutes or so now.
Yeah, sure. We can talk about this. Fuck this
I
movie.
I do want to say though, before we actually do get into the ending, so one criticism I have heard of this movie story is that a lot of the story, especially like the main plot, revolves around specific people being in the right place at the right time. A good example of that is when Ariel's wife, I'm assuming wife, they never actually show them getting married, but
She is. Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of assume that they've been married, but she's having Ariel's kid, and she goes into labor like the second he leaves after the attack starts, which is very convenient.
Yeah, I mean, I like we mentioned before, but again, sort of Mario kind of loves melodrama to some extent, and it's like I'm not even surprised anymore. Okay, so do you want to talk about the ending now?
Yeah, I guess we can. We've been talking for a little while now. It's probably as good a time as any.
So, okay, so what was your reaction when first time we watched it?
The first time when I watched this originally, I was in theaters with about, well, I want to say at least 35 to 40, blabbering otaku like me. There were very few dry eyes in the theater.
Yeah. It's not an easy ending.
It's not. And I mentioned this to you while we were watching it. So if the movie had ended right after you see Lelia and Maquia ride off on the little dragon thing, it still would have been a really good movie and a really good story. But for me, everything that comes after that scene is what makes it a great movie in my mind.
Yeah, I agree.
Because those last little bits just tie up so much. I mean, you get to see Ariel go back home to Dita and their new child, and they're talking about Dita's talking about how she used to treat Ariel so bad, and just like, I used to tell you that liking your mom was weird, and it's not weird. You have a great mom, and Ariel's like, yeah, I know. It took me all this time, but I finally know.
About time.
Yeah, I know, right? And I mean, as we mentioned, you see the whole resolution with Lelia and Krim, who I laugh almost every time I hear his name said because it sounds like they're saying cream.
Cream.
Cream. Iggy.
But then, like, the real hitter comes when, like, the final scene when there's another jump in time. And it's
a huge jump in time. I think it's by far the largest time jump that you see in the story. And you don't immediately realize it's a time jump because, of course, Maquia doesn't really change her appearance that much. At least she doesn't look like she ages that much.
But then you see Ariel's granddaughter, and it's like,
you see Ariel's granddaughter. You've gone straight from the birth of his daughter to his granddaughter being looking like she's maybe 4 or 5 years old,
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and Maquia's like, "Hey, where's your grandfather?" And he's like, "Come with me," which is something you always want to tell a stranger.
And that meeting between Ariel and Maquia at the end is like, that's rough. Ooh.
There's only 2 words. Well, I would say 2 sentences exchanged between them. Ariel opens his eyes and he says, what does it say?
Welcome back.
He says, you're home, or you're back.
Yeah.
And Maquia looks at him and says, I'm home. It's like, oh God, oh my heart, oh God, no. And
then it keeps going because, of course, they're gonna show flashbacks and all of the scenes of them together. It's like,
and then the kicker. I mean, as much as the flashbacks and everything are, the kicker is that when Ariel closes his eyes and he dies, Maquia pulls out of her bag the Hebiel that he had actually burned that night that he came home drunk.
Yeah.
That she kept it all this time, and she just places it on top of him right after he dies in his bed. It's like, oh God, no. No.
And it doesn't stop there. And then she leaves the house.
She leaves the house, and of course the little granddaughter comes up and gives her the dandelions because little kid. And then that's when the whole flashback things start, and you see Ariel from going from like this toddler to this kid, the teenager, and growing up. And the great thing about this flashback is they didn't just use scenes that we had already seen. You see stuff that you hadn't seen before, but I mean, you realize it's still part of a flashback. That's the way to do a flashback. Mix in some stuff that you haven't actually seen before, but you know is taking place at the same time.
Yeah.
You see that, and of course, this whole time there's this great fucking like musical piece that's welling up, and it's so emotional, and it's so great, and then it's like
it keeps escalating and escalating and escalating.
And then you see Maquia turn around, and she's looking back at the house that she just came from, and she's like, and of course, many years ago, she made that promise that, you know, good mothers don't cry, and then she's looking back and she says, sorry, Ariel, your mom's gonna break a promise, and then she just starts breaking down and crying. That's the part when I lost it in the theater.
Yeah.
It's like, oh God, no.
Maquia, aka I'm not crying, you're crying.
Yeah, it's nervous condition. Yeah, that just that scene itself, like as I mentioned, the part if the movie had ended at the part with the dragon flying off, I mean that alone would have made it a great movie, but everything, and especially the scene that comes after it, makes this a 10 out of 10 in my mind. Despite some of the issues that the movie does have, I still gave it a 10 out of 10, mostly
it's
because
a fantastic movie, yeah.
It wraps things up so well with this scene.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you go into that, I guess we can call it an ED, it's the end credits, and that song, oh my God, that song. That, oh, Jesus.
You got very emotional when we watched it.
Yeah, Viator by Rianos? I think that's how you say it. Rianos is the name of the song. Yeah, by the way, Viator in Latin means journey.
Of course it is. Fuck. God damn it.
I just, like, that whole, like, the last 10 minutes just bring everything together so well, and that alone makes it a 10 out of 10 for me. I mean, everything that came before it was great, and I just,
what a great movie. Yeah.
It is. It's just so many allusions to things that so many people, I think, can relate to, and the fact that it all comes together so well in the end. Bless Mario Kata.
Yeah.
Hell of a directorial debut.
Yeah. Honestly, like, ever since Maquia and more recently for me, Anohana, I mean, I've been, like, keeping track of, like, things to come from her, and super excited to see more of whatever she has in store.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, PA Works obviously saw a lot of potential in this, and thank God they did, because it certainly paid off, not just for them, but for the audience as well. I'm really hoping that more studios, or maybe just PA Works in general in the future, will just throw a bunch of money at Mario Kata and just say go, because that seems to be what they did here.
Yep.
And it worked out. I just never, if you see Mario Kata's name attached to anything, just give it a try, with the exception of Keysniver. But we don't
sometimes you get a Keysniver or a Fate Stay Night, sometimes you get Maquia, so you know.
Yeah. I don't know. I give her a little bit of leeway on Keysniver because she actually came to Studio Trigger with like 3 seasons worth of stuff, and Trigger's like, we don't have the money for this.
Yeah. Oh well.
Yeah. But yeah, that's Maquia. I mean, it'll. If you, first of all, I'm assuming since this was a spoiler cast, you've already obviously seen this if you've made it this far.
I really hope for anyone who made it this far without watching the movie that,
but if you have watched this and you get a chance to, sit down with your mother and watch this movie. Because I did with my mother, and it was a great experience. Even though my mother is not really big on animation, she seemed to enjoy it. And it gave us something to talk about afterwards. So, yeah, if you haven't, sit down with your mother and watch this, because it's a great thing to sit down and watch with. And she doesn't even have to be your biological mother, just whoever you call mom.
Yeah, she could be from like a land far away where they're like immortal and shit. That's fine.
Yeah. Or if you can't go and sit and watch this with your mother, just call her and tell her how you feel about her.
That's always a good idea.
Because eventually she won't be there, and you'll wish you could have picked up the phone and talked to her. On that sad note, thank you all for dropping in to listen to us. Shut up. I'm just trying to make a good point. We hope you enjoyed it because we always enjoy bringing this stuff to you. If you want to check out previous episodes of the podcast, you can find us on YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, and Spotify. If you want to keep up with what we're doing, you can join us on Discord, Facebook, Twitter, and our website. Shoot us an email if you have any questions or if you have ideas for topics you would like for us to talk about in the future, or if you have ideas for shows you would like for us to do Spoilercast for as well. Links to all these things will be down below in the description. As always, I have been your host, Alex, and I will see you next time. Say goodnight, Ariel.
Good night, Maquia.